Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends. My name is Chris Sainty and I am the British Ambassador to Portugal. And welcome to the third and the last in our series of workshops on the role of science in policy making. Welcome back to those of you who attended one or both of our previous workshops. It's great to see you all again. And welcome to those of you who are joining us for the first time this afternoon. So these seminars are a joint project organised by the British Embassy in Lisbon in collaboration with the Centre for Philosophy of Science at the University of Lisbon. And so the first thing I want to say is a big thank you to the Centre, and thank you in particular to Dra. Mara Almeida for the magnificent support in planning and delivering this project. But my warmest thanks also go, of course, to our panel of fantastic speakers and moderators for sharing their time with us this afternoon. Now, in the previous sessions, we focused mainly on the way science and policy interact in government in the context of executive decision making and policy making. In today's session, we're going to be looking at the role of science in a parliamentary context. Science advice to Parliament and to parliamentarians. And of course, parliaments sit at the very heart of our democratic political systems. They make our laws, they safeguard our interests, and very importantly, they hold governments to account. And in order to do that, and faced with the same complexity that we've talked about in the context of the decisions that governments and ministers have to take in ever more complex areas like climate change, pandemic response, and so on, the question is, how do we ensure that our elected representatives are properly equipped to do their job? So I think that, that is basically the exam question for today. And we have a panel of speakers who are extremely well qualified to discuss this and offer us their insights. And that's really the purpose of today, to have an exchange and learn from the experience and the ideas of others. In the UK, over many years, we've developed a framework for integrating science and scientific advice into policy making, both in government and in Parliament. And we're certainly proud of the institutions that we've developed for this purpose, and we have a lot of our own experience to share. And today, for example, we're going to be hearing from Dr. Grant Hill-Cawthorne, who is the head of POST, which is the UK Parliament's Office for Science and Technology, which is a really important part of that science and policy ecosystem in the UK. So I say that, we're proud of the structures and the culture that we've built up in the UK to integrate science into our policy making. But I don't think anyone would claim that our system is perfect or that we've got all of the answers. And I think from the UK side, we would all acknowledge that we have a great deal to learn from others. And that's really what today is all about, sharing and learning. And for me, as the ambassador in Portugal, this is really important because I see science collaboration as a fundamental pillar of the future relationship between our two countries. It's already very strong, and everywhere I go in Portugal, I meet talented Portuguese scientists and researchers who've studied or done their research at UK universities and almost always maintain very strong links to the UK science community. And that's a great thing, and I'm very determined that that should continue. And now we know that despite leaving the European Union, the UK intends to continue to participate in EU research programmes like the Future Horizon Europe programme. And this, I think, is extremely good news. But that's enough by way of introduction from me. I'd just like to thank you all again for your attendance and your participation in these workshops, and encourage you all to participate in what I'm sure will be a lively discussion this afternoon. Do please give us any feedback afterwards. We're always open to that, and in particular to any suggestions any of you may have for future projects and activities. But now it's my pleasure to hand over to Mara Almeida, who is going to provide us with a short introduction to today's discussion. Thank you very much, and over to you, Mara.
Thank you, Ambassador. Good afternoon. Many thanks for joining us for the third and last session of this three-part conference. And thanks to the speakers and moderator for having accepted to participate in this event. I would just like to know that the recordings of the two previous sessions are already available on the webpage of the event, and hopefully those producing this session will be there soon too. I think most of us will agree on the relevance and need of science advice on policy making, both in ordinary situations and situations of crisis, such as a pandemic or climate change. One of the questions that we have been exploring in these sessions is how science advice is expected to take place, as to ensure a robust and transparent engagement of researchers with policymakers and politicians. Most of us will also agree that this is a challenging and complex process, particularly when considering the distinct nature, aims and needs of the science and policy worlds. For that, diverse boundary structures and mechanisms have been conceived to act as translators between these two communities. The models of these structures, as well their impact on policy-making process, vary among countries, as we have seen on the last session. So in the last session, we were provided with insights about some of the existing systems used to provide science advice to government, as for example, the science advice mechanism in the European Commission, the system of the chief scientific advisors in either the UK or New Zealand. So these structures work under different constraints and guidelines. And some of the key issues that we have heard about in the context of science advice in the past two sessions have been associated with transparency, trust, and integrity, raising questions how best to embed them in the work by structures or mechanisms providing advice. These issues, of course, are also relevant to structures providing science advice to Parliament. So the session of today will specifically aim at discussing the relevance and need of legislative science advice, including examples of formal and permanent structures that channel scientific evidence and knowledge into national parliamentary debates. So one of the aims of today will be to understand how best to support the role of Parliament in its many tasks. So we hope that the previous sessions and the session of today have or will contribute to your knowledge and interest in science advice, and more specifically that they will provide some insights into the deep entanglements of policy and science, but also into the challenges and tensions in their involvement, and finally into the urgent need to understand and design better structures of advice and cooperation between scientists and policymakers. Last but not least, I would like to thank the British Embassy Lisbon and the Centre for Philosophy of Science of the University of Lisbon for their interest in all the support in organizing this event. Thank you. And for now, it's all for me, and I would like to give the floor to the moderator of the session of today. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy.
Thank you, Mara. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. And also from me, a very warm welcome to everyone attending this workshop. We have four speakers who, in a very nice way, span the whole spectrum of issues that we want to discuss. Melanie Peters from the Netherlands and Grant Hill Cawthorne from Britain can report about a relatively long-standing 30 years of practice of advising the government about science and technology. From Spain, we will hear from Andreu Climent about the, at this moment, happening creation of such an office at Parliament in Madrid. And of course, Carla Sousa will report about those discussions from the heart of the Parliament in Portugal. My name is Wiebe Bijker. I am Professor of Technology and Society at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Trondheim. And I am an emeritus professor in Maastricht. And I have been engaged in issues of technology assessment for a long while. What we will do is we will have these four presentations for about 15 minutes, and then I will ask you, other participants, for some quick questions. We do that for about 5 minutes. And after we have listened to all four of the presenters, we will have a plenary discussions. I would like to ask you to write your question in the chat box. Teams doesn't allow us, and we are with too many to have everyone on screen and orally present the question. So please write your question in the chat box, and I will present them to the speakers. Good. Then let's let me present to you Dr. Grant Hill Cawthorne. I have news for you. In the CV that you could read, in the small bio that you could read on the website, you saw that he was head of POST, the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology in Britain. But since a week, he is now the Director of Research in the House of Commons. And I'm sure that he can talk from both positions and even be more sort of informative to all of us. He set up a laboratory, and he is a microbiologist, a medical microbiologist, worked in Saudi Arabia, created a laboratory there, did his PhD on the use of microbiology in public health issues. He is now also a senior lecturer in communicable diseases and epidemiology at the School of Public Health in the University of Sydney. But most importantly, he has been the head of POST, this Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology, the unit that advises the UK Parliament and that bridges between research and policy. And I'm sure that we will hear a lot more about that from him. Grant, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Viva. So hopefully you can all see my slides now. And as Weber says, I have recently transitioned to oversee all of the Commons Library research as well as POST. I am hoping to backfill the POST position rather than having two jobs for too long. But that does mean that I cover the research evidence and kind of research science part of it, which is done by POST. But also in the Commons Library, it covers all the policy research that underpins legislation and scrutiny and debate within UK Parliament. So what I'm going to talk about today is very quickly introduce the difference between government and Parliament in the UK, just because we have a Westminster system that's different to most European parliaments. And then to talk about science advice to policymakers, and in particular POST, and then what we did to pivot to cope with COVID-19. So UK Parliament is made up of three components: the House of Commons, which is the 650 elected MPs representing about 100 to 150,000 constituents. We have the House of Lords, which is a nominated body of 800 lords, mostly from various walks of life, so scientists, doctors, teachers, civil servants, nurses, politicians. And then we of course have the monarch and the Queen in Parliament, who opens Parliament and sets out the government's legislative agenda. And so Parliament is very much there to represent the people, and it does that through the House of Commons. But the most important component of what it does is two things. One is to scrutinise the work of government. So by this, I mean to examine what government is producing in terms of policy and the way that government is governing its functions, and then to critique that and give feedback on that. It's also there to make and change laws. So all legislation has to be passed by both houses and then given royal assent by the Queen. Traditionally, the government introduces legislation because they have the mandate from the people, as it were, but then both houses can then add amendments and examine that. And then, of course, it is a forum for debate. And finally, very importantly, it is only Parliament that determines how money can be spent. So the government has to go to Parliament each year and present its budget and ask Parliament to provide the funding for that. So in a Westminster system, we don't have a very distinct executive legislative branch. So Her Majesty's government on the right is made up of the party that commands the confidence of the House. So traditionally, that is the party that has the majority of MPs in the House of Commons. And the leader of that party will be asked by the Queen to form a government. And then the Prime Minister, who they become, will identify their cabinet and then will identify ministers. But the Prime Minister, all cabinet members and all ministers have to be members of either the House of Commons or occasionally the House of Lords. And so all members of Parliament and members of the government also have their legislative and constituency-facing parts. So you've already seen in the previous talks how science advice works in the government architecture. So the Prime Minister has a government chief scientific advisor who directly advises him, but also has a chief scientific advisor network with a chief scientific advisor now in every single government department and arm's length body. And they are relatively independent civil servants that have the ear of the Permanent Secretary and the Secretary of State within those departments, and really are there to advise the Secretary of State what the current evidence is behind a policy and to highlight when a policy might not actually be in line with current evidence or current thinking. Within emergencies, you'll have seen that this changes quite considerably. So in an emergency, traditionally the cabinet was set up what's called Cobra, which is a group of senior secretaries of state that are chaired by the Prime Minister and provides the emergency response. And a core part of this is the scientific and technical advice that's provided. During COVID, this has been provided by SAGE, the Science Advisory Group for Emergencies, supported by the Government Office for Science, which is then contributed to by a vast number of scientists. And we're probably talking about 150 to 200 scientists in the various advisory groups during COVID. So back in the mid-80s, it was recognised in Parliament that there was a need for legislative science advice. And what I like to do is look back at the Postnotes that were produced in 1989 when Post was first founded, and it gives you a flavour of what people were struggling with. So the first thing that was happening was the UK was the first country in the world to legislate for the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Act, so the use of IVF and the various scientific but also ethical and philosophical ramifications of that. The UK put forward the Computer Misuse Act in the late 80s, which I quite like this graphic because it shows a virus being imported via a 5¼ floppy disk and clearly shows that people were concerned about computer viruses even in the mid-80s. It was looking at suspected bovine spongiform encephalopathy within cattle, and Post was a bit concerned at that time that this could spill over to humans, which we know it eventually did to create variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. Genome sequencing was first coming on board with the Human Genome Project announced about that time. And then, of course, there was also increasing science on the amount of carbon dioxide that humans were producing and putting into the atmosphere and the impacts that this might have on temperatures in the future. So at that stage, a group of MPs and Lords went over to the US and they studied the Office for Technology Assessment, which was a huge body in the US that effectively did technology assessment. And so technology assessment is very much about looking at the research and the evolution of both technology and scientific procedures and understanding how that might impact upon human policy, particularly from a legal, ethical, and policy point of view. And so in 1989, that group of MPs set up a charity called the Parliamentary Office for Science and Technology that was then initially funded by Parliament on a trial basis and made permanent in 2001. And since then, we've grown to about 15 people. Over time, Post has produced various outputs, and its 4-page Post note has become one of the kind of blueprints that legislative science advice around the world now uses. And we've exported this to lots of countries around the world, including Mexico and the United States that's just adopted a similar approach. So how does it work in practice? So when I first joined Post, I realized that there was a lack of research evidence really getting to the heart of what was happening in scrutiny and debate. And I knew this because just before I arrived, my predecessor had commissioned a research report looking at the role of research in UK Parliament. And this found that academics and research producers were just not being called in front of select committees. They weren't being examined by MPs, and no one was really getting to the heart at what evidence actually shows. And so for its 30th anniversary, I launched the Post at 30 strategy, which very explicitly was the knowledge broker to bridge this research world of our many hundred universities that we have in the UK and the policy world within Parliament, in order to reach out and make sure that evidence was coming in, and to do that in a much more proactive way than had been done before. And so we do this in various ways. We partner with academia. So I created the Knowledge Exchange Unit, which is an outward face of Parliament to the academic community, who have now built connections with 150 knowledge mobilisers in each university, who identifies academics who can help us in all of our work, whether that's a bill going through Parliament, whether that's scrutiny that's been done by a committee. We also organise horizon scanning on behalf of Parliament. So we run an 18-month cycle to look at the latest research that's coming through, and then provide articles that first outline what might be required for Parliament's attention from those, and then we produce Postnotes, which are very in-depth look at the impact that this research might have on Parliament and policy within the UK. We also do retroactive or research synthesis. So when a select committee is looking at a particularly complicated area that requires synthesis of the existing research, my team will provide that for them on a case-by-case basis. And we've extended this through a rapid response mechanism during COVID. And I've taken on a chief scientific advisor role. And actually throughout COVID, I have been on the central bodies within Parliament determining what our response would be as an actual organisation, as well as a legislative response. And then we also train. So we train academics to be what I call policy-wise researchers, so knowing how to actually engage with policymakers. But also we train our parliamentary staff in how to use research evidence, and we train MPs and their staff so that policymakers of the future understand how research is used. So our Knowledge Exchange Unit recently celebrated its second anniversary. And during that time, it's delivered a training program that's had over 1,000 researchers be upskilled in how to give evidence to Parliament. It has 250 knowledge mobilisers across the country. And it has, you can look on the Parliament's YouTube account, there's 6 seminars on there on how academics can engage with Parliament. We've also had a big push to try and increase the diversity of academics. So we not just career stage, but also down to ethnicity, gender, and a focus on disabled researchers being able to give evidence to politicians. So this is the kind of thing that we've produced Postnotes in the last year. So the way Postnotes work is we go out and interview about 30 different stakeholders from across government, the civil service, academia, civil society, and patients where it's necessary, and boil all that information down into a 4-page briefing that then goes through internal review, external review by that original group of stakeholders, and then finally I sign it off at the end. And the idea of doing this is it captures everything that's published in the scientific literature, everything that's in the grey literature, and then all that stuff that's all currently happening that might not be captured in the written form at the moment. And so you can see the wide variety of things that we publish, everything from social sciences through to biology, health and physical sciences. And so we have a very complex horizon scanning process, and I'll make sure that these slides are available to use. But effectively, this has evolved over the last decade, and our next horizon scan will come out just after Easter in time for the Queen reopening Parliament. And so it will highlight our agenda for what Postnotes will be produced in the next year. So COVID, we had to rapidly change the way we work. So Post has always been very proactive, horizon scanning, planning what will be important in the future. We had done advice, and we've done Postnotes in the past on pandemics, on zoonotic infections. We knew this was a risk, but it wasn't much good just saying, we knew this, we foresaw it, Bob's your uncle. Instead, what we did was actually switch the way of working to become very reactive. So we started scrutinising what scientific advice was being put in front of government to see where the government was acting in that way that was being advised, but also whether that advice was adequate in the first place. And so we've produced rapid responses in the past year on everything from children and schools to the use of apps to social distancing, food supply chains, virology, immunology, vaccines, etc. We've also supported all the many committees that have done inquiries into parts of COVID. So at my last count, there's about 75 committee inquiries looking at everything from the food supply chain to the science underpinning the response, to whether we should have closed our borders earlier, to the impact on ethnic minority groups, and also to look towards the future on how we can better strengthen biosecurity and national security. At the start, we actually did a call to all of our academic colleagues to put together a database, and within a space of a few days on Twitter, we managed to get together 5,000 academics on our database, and we've been able to use those names both to put to our committees for when they want witnesses, but also to then ask those academics, what are you concerned about? What are the short, medium and long-term concerns that you have about COVID, and what should we be doing as a parliament? And so we produced these as a number of reports in the last year. And those cover everything from work and employment to health and social care, to the future of education, the impact on crime, justice and policing. COVID has been one of those things that has affected every part of society. And so we've tried to capture that in our briefing work. We also identified COVID-19 areas of research interest. So these were 20 areas that Parliament feels it needs more evidence in. So everything from what have we practically learnt from COVID through to how can we become more resilient in the future, and what are the long-term health and mental health impacts. That's also allowed us to gain a repository of research that, as it's done in real time, is then deposited with us, and we're able to then pass that on to politicians. So finally, next steps. At the moment, we have been doing a lot of work to focus on select committees themselves and the way that they function. And last year, we fed into the liaison committee, which is the committee of committee chairs, on the way that they can better incorporate research evidence into select committee inquiries. And you can, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but you can see all the areas that we covered within that report. But also I've ticked off everything that we've managed to achieve in the past 2 years, which is a huge amount, everything from using citizens' assemblies to inform our work to producing the areas of research interest that I just showed you. And so the next emergency is very much climate change. And so with COP26 in November and the UK's presidency of both that and G7, it's been a really good time to start to think about how can we scrutinise out the organisation of COP, but also what we'll do with this opportunity. So that started off by the Climate Assembly UK, which was a citizens' assembly of 200 representatives on what can individual citizens do for us to reach our net zero target. And then we also did a survey of experts in the UK that fed into a committee inquiry and ended up with the chair of that committee writing to the president of COP26 with the list of priorities for Parliament. And then finally, we are helped in all of this by a vast amount of research transmission within the UK. And this is something that's grown very recently. And again, I include this slide for completeness, but there's a lot of work and a lot of organisations in the UK now that support us in producing research. So I'm going to stop there. Please look at our website for any further details at post.parliament.uk. And also we have a sister website for the Knowledge Exchange Unit on research impact that has how-to guides and ways that researchers can interact with our Parliament in order to help us in our work for legislation and debate. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Grant. That was a very comprehensive overview, not only of the regular work of Post, but using the COVID emergency, also of how you react when something unexpected happened. So thank you very much for that. I am now awaiting questions from the audience. We will take some 5 minutes for that. And while I wait people to type, could I raise one question with you, Grant? And it is about setting the agenda of Post. You very clearly explained what happened around COVID, and I was struck. I really liked your going out to the research community. I mean, that's what I understood. Go out to the research community, ask them what they thought would be relevant, and then you reacted to that, and you built the Post activities around that. And you described something similar for the what you call the next emergency on climate change. But now let's for a while hope that there are no emergencies around. Then I think your agenda is formed by what you call this horizon scanning. Mm-hmm. How do you decide what are then the relevant topics? I mean, do members of parliament have any input? Do they ask questions to you, or is it your own initiative? Well, please, can you elaborate?
Yeah, no, by all means. So the horizon scanning exercise, we're just, as I say, coming to the end. So effectively, we'd identified about 3,000 research papers and reports that will impact Parliament in the next 5 years. And from that, the team then came up with 60 what we call areas of change. So kind of groupings of those that were then boiled down by our various select committee teams to 30. And those have then gone through external review. So our initial publication is these 30 areas of change, which are high-level overviews on the changes that might happen in the next 5 years. From that, the team will develop a long list of particular topics. So there'll be a bit more granular things like all the Postnotes I've shown, so horizon scanning or food security or something like that. That long list then goes around our committee colleagues and our library colleagues to see what would be best for them, so what would support their work and any upcoming select committee inquiries. And then we take a final shortlist to our board, which is made up of 14 members of the House of Commons, 4 members of the House of Lords, and 4 representatives of the scientific community, so the 4 national academies. And it's ultimately that board's decision on what we then take for each of these post notes. So each post note is 3 months worth of work, and that will dictate our 25 to 30 post notes a year that we then generate. So we do want to do this in collaboration with both our parliamentary colleagues, but also with our members in both houses.
Thank you. I'm not sure that I'm now visible, but well, I'll talk anyway. Thank you. That is a very convincing answer, because I now realize that this implies that the agenda is really owned by Parliament. I mean, by the process that you have just described, they have expressed what they want to know, which makes the landing and the reception of your post notes even better than it otherwise would be.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I have a nice and very relevant question from Daniel Endler, and I think that is a question that we may want to raise with the next speakers too. Daniel asks, how does Post deal with highly controversial issues, and then controversial in the scientific sense, those issues on which respectable scientists still strongly disagree? Does, in one way or the other, a post note reflect that kind of certainty? That's the question.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And obviously we've gone through this at various times. Post was around during the MMR scare back in the 90s. It's been around during the various iterations of scares on 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, and now 5G. And so very much but we also find that most politicians don't, there aren't many areas of controversy anymore in the science realm. And where the most controversy occurs is actually social sciences. So we do cover social sciences, and you'll find that there's much more political debate about the approach to education or justice than there is to a physical science element, would be the first thing I'd say. What we do is, through our stakeholder interviews, is we are looking for evidence-based views to put forward in Postnotes, and we capture the whole range of those. So we're not trying to achieve balance, because if there isn't evidence for something, we just don't include it. But where there is evidence and where there is conflicting evidence, we are very upfront with that. And we will try to communicate both the different things that the evidence shows, but also where there is uncertainty. And we find politicians are very open to that. People in the UK, they understand uncertainty, and actually members of the public do. And it's much better to be upfront and say that to them.
Thank you very much. I have more questions, some relating to evidence that you grant, but more generally we in the world of technology assessment may have on the, say, the working of this system. But I will postpone those questions until the plenary, because this may be something that the other speakers want to speak to as well. So thank you very much, Grant, for this first 15 minutes. And I would now like to introduce Dr. Melanie Peters. Melanie is director of the Rathenau Institute. The Rathenau Institute is the technology assessment office of the Dutch Parliament. Dr. Peters has a broad background in science, industry, and the public sector. Combines that with experience in both national and international politics and social relations work. Her background is in food technology. Then she became a certified toxicologist, and she did her PhD in biochemistry in Imperial College in London. She did research as a team leader at Shell Research and Technology Center in Amsterdam, and then had various positions combining science, policy, politics, and social issues. So I'm extremely glad, Melanie, that you will talk to us about the experience that you have in the Netherlands advising Parliament and the general public, but you'll speak to that as director of the Rathenau Institute. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Wiebe. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, and I
okay.
Everyone.
Oh, okay, that is nice, because we were not entirely sure, in spite of working from home for more than a year, if everything was working. If you can still hear me. Yes, the Rathenau Institute, if you see my PowerPoint presentation, I cannot see it at the moment, but I thought it was going to be shown. Can you see it?
No, not yet, but I think that they will put it up
okay.
To go.
Yeah.
No, Melanie, we are trying to solve that. There is a technical problem, sorry.
Then I suggest that
okay.
you continue, Mel. Ah, there it is.
Yeah, oh, there it is. Yes, yeah. So this is, I would like to talk from our experience. You can see we have the logo with the 35 years. We are celebrating our 35th anniversary this year. And like the British office that Grant just talked about, also the Rathenau Institute was modeled after, or the idea came about when in the United States there was the OTA, the Office of Technology Assessment. And unlike the British colleagues, we are not located in the Parliament, but we are located in The Hague, that's our capital, but we're outside of Parliament. And our funding comes from our Ministry of Education and Science, making us more or less independent from Parliament. So unlike the British system, Parliament doesn't own our agenda, but can also ask us to do work for them. But we also can be independent advisors or put things on the parliamentary agenda. So we are constructed almost in a triangle because we're also part of a National Academies of Sciences. And this construction was chosen so we would not be part of Parliament. And perhaps if there came a new coalition, because in the Netherlands we always have a coalition government, but it could find that we were too much working for the past coalition in Parliament. So that's why we are at a distance, but not too far away from Parliament. We're funded by the Ministry of Education and Science, but we're also outside of the ministry. We started when we were founded in the ministry, but it was found that the science agenda was not always the public agenda. And we are part of the academy to keep us also independent from the other forces. But on the other hand, we also look at science. So sometimes we had a question just now about scientific views that could differ. So we also don't want to be only part of the dominant scientific view. I'm telling you this is not because this is the ideal model. It is how we were constructed in the Netherlands. And we can look back at 35 years of experience working this way. And I think it's nice to tell you that it was actually the business community that was asking for an Office of Technology Assessment. The initial issue grant mentioned a number of issues, of course, like genetic engineering, but the issue that spurred off our institute was the introduction of the personal computer in the Netherlands. Which was used in homes, but also in offices, and it caused a lot of unemployment end of the 70s. And this really brought home the message that technology has severe societal implications that really are also political, how to deal with the results of this. And another interesting thing, I think, for you is that the university community, the academic community, was also very interested that there should be an office like ours. And Wiebe Bijker, our host today, is one of those people from academia who was always an advocate that there should be an institute like Rathenau Institute. So in that way, we were constructed as a wish of many communities. And still we feel very much that we're boundary workers, that we work on the boundary of all of these communities. So we work for society, we work for Parliament, we are funded by the ministry, we are part of the academy, we have connections with the academic world, but also with society. And this answers one of the questions that was put to me by the organizers. Do you need an institution like Rathenau Institute? We think it helps to acknowledge that there is this boundary work, but of course there are different ways to organize this in different countries. Maybe it's good to show the next slide and I can talk from there. The important thing working for Parliament is that evidence-informed democracy, we never say evidence-based, is not technocracy. And the other side is that evidence-informed democracy is not anything goes. Grant showed this very well. It's not that anything that can be politicians like is also what can be proven and to be true. But what we say, democracy is not only about what is true. It's also what is good. And what we want to spend our money on as a society, and to go out of the idea that it should be just one institution doing science advice to Parliament. That's why we like to talk about not the institutions only involved, but also what skills are needed to do this type of advisory work. And then it's the skills of scientists, politicians, also the government officials who often have the initiative of legislation in the Netherlands, although our Parliament can have the initiative for legislation. And how we like to think about it is that this is an interaction that needs to be organized. And maybe I can go to the next slide. But then, it needs...
Annie, sorry, this is Wiebe. I just had a note from the technicians that although I can see you, but I think the audience cannot see you, but we do hear you. So let's just continue. And this is more a message to our participants. Please listen to Melanie, and hopefully our technicians will be able to get her face to the screen again. So please continue, Melanie.
Okay, thank you very much. So how we like to think about it is how to organize interactions between all these groups in society and institutionalize useful and trusted evidence for politics. And as I said, every country has its own tradition. We are used to our Dutch tradition. But actually in every country, if we even go back to Greek rhetoric, we know that politicians know there is logos. We have knowledge. It's also about ethos. Who am I as a politician? What responsibility do I take to realize public value? And pathos, which is often thought of as, okay, I'm just being a populist, but it's not. It's really addressing concerns that people have, and it's always a balance. So just to know what evidence is not enough. Politicians need to balance and to be accountable for all of these things, and that is a universal thing. Maybe we can go to the next slide. And what we've learned over the years, that we need trusted knowledge, and that this means long-term investment in sound science, and I will go into that next. It also needs really independent science. It needs professional policymakers and politicians, and it also needs trust in people. And that is the last thing I want to say, but we can go to my next slide. We already heard the ambassador also talk about ecosystems, and this is the way we like to talk about it. We need scientists that are at the forefront, and that my British colleague also mentioned, that can sometimes see things that we have not realized as a society. There's new evidence, new trends. And the classical example was, of course, those physicists who found there was a hole in the ozone layer. And they are the ones that brought on this issue. So we do need people from university also to be heard in panels at Parliament. And our role in that is often to advise. Who can we invite? Well, invite those people. And there was a question, yes, scientists disagree. So invite various scientists. But if we make a paper for Parliament, we show there is varying opinions, and we also show there is varying societal opinions, appreciation of what the problem is. We also have our public knowledge institutes. Of course, our Institute of Health was very prominent in this crisis with Corona. But of course, the people from that institute cannot tell us what the right measures are. Yeah, they can tell us about the virus, but they can't say whether social distancing is something that Dutch people will accept, or that our health institutes that have to design a vaccination strategy should be funded in a certain way or organized in a certain way. So we also have people in public knowledge institutes, and we have also societal knowledge. And I think it's very important to realize that knowledge is not academia. Knowledge comes in many shapes and forms. And we also need the knowledge of practitioners. It's different types of knowledge. But whenever we talk about science advice to Parliament, we need to make sure that if we ask people from academia to play a role in this, then they need to realize it's a special skill, and they need to have time or funding to do this. If we ask our public knowledge institutes to play a role in informing our Parliament, they need to, there needs to be time and funding for this. It's not like, okay, scientists, you are doing your papers and you're doing your teaching, but please come into Parliament and tell us the way the world works. And of course, as an institute, Raadsnaam Institute can be bridging between this, but it's important, in whatever way you organize science advice in your country, that you realize that it's an extra skill and it needs extra time Maybe we can go to the next slide. We found that it's very important, of course, to have independent science and to also enable science to ask the question that was not asked. Because public trust in science goes if people feel that it is used in industry or in policy or by politicians in the wrong way. This means that we need to demand from scientists or also enable them to be critical. And independent science is at the moment quite difficult because scientists in the Netherlands are really asked to find their own funding, be it from industry or from government. But to be able to foresee issues that are coming up that are not that have not been spotted before, we need to allocate a specific budget, and we also need to make sure that we can ask questions that are not in the public mind or the political mind at the moment. That's why our institute, for instance, has the freedom to come up with any issue we think people should know about for the future. Maybe we can go to the next slide. Of course, we saw it also in Corona time that policymakers and politicians also sometimes like to outsource decision making. They like to think perhaps that we can automate government. There is an idea that big data could come to very good policy decisions. And we also find that media logic is sometimes in the way. People find it difficult to have an open debate in science, in parliament. And politicians find it difficult to talk about issues where there is a lot of stake. And if we look, for instance, at Corona, where they really feel awkward because they're not virologists. We talked about the Corona app in the Netherlands, and really politicians felt very uneasy with that subject. And what our role is, and of course, with all the other stakeholders that bring on knowledge in the Netherlands, be it Amnesty International, be it people from universities, scientists, is to actually empower politicians that they don't need to be the ones that are the experts, but they are really, they feel that they can ask the right questions in Parliament. They can ask questions about what does it mean to society, and that they can differ in opinion who should pay. Maybe it's individual responsibilities, maybe there are collective responsibilities, but at least they feel that they can ask questions about vaccines, about vaccination strategies, about apps that are used, about a Corona passport. And we still feel that it's the same situation from when we started 35 years ago. Politicians feel awkward, but they also feel supported by our work and the work of people that can tell them what the balance is between evidence that there is, but also those value issues that are relevant in these cases. Human rights, our constitutional rights that we have, societal costs, societal benefits, and that it's a puzzle bringing all those aspects together to empower them to ask the right questions. And what we talk about is that often it's not a good decision or a bad decision in Parliament, and especially if we talk about transitions, if we talk about very complex issues, there is a lot of uncertainty, and government or governance is actually finding a way out. Same is true again for the Corona crisis. No one has the answer, but it's finding a way out, also listening to advisory bodies, but also listening to people, looking at costs. And we have to admit, and I think that is also, we can't make stuff easy or simple for politicians, but we can show them actually these are really difficult issues to get to grips with anyway. But they have to be accountable. They have to say not, they cannot hide and say, okay, this was the right decision. They also have to say this is the best decision we can make at this moment. Maybe we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so what is needed? Our institute, we are 60 people. We have the luxury actually to be able to do this boundary work, to bring value issues to the fore, to put them on the agenda and look what knowledge is there, what evidence is there, what ideas are there. And to also point out who can take responsibility. Is it an issue that individuals can take responsibility? We really say that there should be oversight bodies or more policy or maybe less policy. What does it mean for various stakeholders? And that's how we make our Postnotes that my colleague showed. We do short briefs to Parliament. We also do big reports, but we always show policy options. And we had 27 parties, I think, taking part at our last elections last week. So we know that there are various opinions and we have to cater for all of the parties in Parliament. But we can point, if we do it in the right way without going into party politics, we can say there is something political here, there's something you need to debate, there's questions you need to ask, but you may differ in opinion about the outcomes. But please, these are things that need to be put on the agenda. And then I go to my last slide, I think. Yeah, and this is really a cry from the heart, what we've seen, and maybe it's in response to movements all over the world, that there is another demand for big government. Of course, in terms of crisis, the idea is that we can solve questions top down, and that even automating government decisions could be a good way, and that this is a very neutral way. But yeah, like what I talked about, what you see in the picture is a dialogue about human enhancement or DNA, modifying human DNA. We involved children, we involved all sorts of citizens in the Netherlands, and actually after 1 hour, they already come up with the question, it's maybe not about DNA, it's about what society we want to be. And that's so, good actually to experience, that if you talk to people, you bring people in contact, they immediately bring big issues that involve a lot of knowledge, but they bring it back to what is important. And this is also what politicians need to keep in mind. People are never stupid. They may not know everything, but they will immediately ask, what society do we want to be? Who is profiting from this technology? Who is going to pay? What will the world look like when we've grown up? And this is just a cry from the heart. Don't forget to talk to people, to talk with people, to bring people into contact, because then it's very easy to get the right focus and to also see what it is actually that the real political questions are. So yes, it's about knowledge, it's about science, but in the end, it's what society do we want to be. That's what I wanted to share with you. So there's not one way of institutionalizing what we do. It could be take various shapes and forms in many countries, I think. But these are some general aspects that always come up.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Melanie. You very nicely broadened the issue beyond institutional questions and making a bridge also to the very first session. And I again remind our audience that they can go to the website and review the first session if they are interested in. Just a very quick question, Melanie. How big in terms of people is the Rathenau Institute roughly? Grant mentioned that his post is about 15 people. What about the Rathenau Institute?
We are 60 people at the moment.
60.
Yeah.
I have one question, but only one question, and then we will continue with Andreu. One question that was raised already after Grant's presentation, but very nicely connects to your very last slide. Someone asked, what role do citizens play? So I'll reshape that question. It was originally asked to Grant. Now to you, Melanie. In your last slide, you formulated this kind of outcry to listen to citizens, but was this a one-off event, or is it a more regular part of the Rathenau Institute's process of giving scientific advice to Parliament?
Yes, it's the latter. So even in our institutional, it was from the beginning already that we are serving Parliament and society. And this was, I mentioned the personal computer. It was already thought that actually people need to familiarize them, but also they need to ask questions about it. And so it's also our mandate actually to explain things, to make issues palatable to people, but people also make them palatable to us. And we can use what we find in these interactions, dialogues. We can also use it in Parliament. So yeah, it's actually two parts of our mandate, but they go very well together. And actually, what I have to tell you maybe is that we had a coalition government with the Christian parties just before the elections, and they didn't want to talk about human enhancement. So they said, let's have a public dialogue, so we don't need to come to decisions in Parliament. So this they kept it out of Parliament because they couldn't agree on it. And they said, well, then we first go to public consultation. And that's why with 35 parties, we organized these dialogues all around the country and came up with the arguments that the kids and others had. And we presented them as just politicians can inform them and can say, okay, that's a good argument. That's also my concern. And another politician can say, well, hey, I hear this argument that people with disabilities brought to the front, and actually I think this is what really is my concern, but I didn't have the right words for it perhaps. So yeah, sometimes it's when it's stuck in Parliament, we have gridlock. Then the Netherlands, as a very much a polder society, we have very many tastes and forms. Then we go to society. So yeah, that's also part of the game.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Melanie. So it was not a one-off thing, but it was a very special case where actually the whole consultation did result from deliberations in Parliament and government.
Yeah.
I will keep the other questions for the plenary, and now would very much like to introduce to all of you Dr. Andreu Climent. He is the Ramon y Cajal, if I pronounce that well, researcher at the Universitat Politécnica de Valencia. That Ramon y Cajal researcher position is a very prestigious competitive position issued by the Spanish State Investigation Agency. More importantly, he is also at this moment the president of the Association Science in the Parliament. I'll come to that in a minute. His background is in electronic engineering. He worked at the Gregorio Maranon Hospital and then developed as a result from that research and co-founded a startup company, Corify Care, as a spin-off of that Gregorio Maranon Hospital. And that company focuses on improving the diagnosis and treatment of patients with cardiac arrhythmias. Andreu, as I said, is one of the drivers of the independent association Science in the Parliament. And that work, the work that that association did, resulted in, at this very moment, in 2021, Spanish Parliament establishing their Office for Science and Technology Advice. So now, after listening to the experiences in Britain and the Netherlands, we will now listen to the experiences in Spain, which are really very fresh about, well, arguing for and then successfully establishing such an office. Please, the floor is yours, Andreu.
Explain together with these great people what we have been doing in Spain, and basically I share my screen, so I don't know if you already can see it. Yes, perfect. Yes. So as you will see, there are offices around the world with more than 30 years of experience. So I will not be able to explain too much about our office because our office has few days of experience. But I can try to explain how we were able to set up an office in Spain. So at the end, as very well explained Grant and Melanie, the idea is that science will be one of the key aspects to overcome the challenges and to seize the opportunities. I think that the science, and this year probably more than ever, is the only thing that is here for helping the society, but at the same time, it needs to be ready, all the society, to use it in an appropriate way. So here in Spain, we are a country in which, I don't know exactly why, but for whatever reason, we do not remember our history, and we do not think that science and technology has been a key aspect in our country. And that's why, probably why explains that we are a country in which our budget in science is lower than our neighborhoods. And also, we do not have a big application of science in different science advice in different areas. So in 2019, we are starting one or the associations that tries to move into providing science advice to the legislative decisions. As really well explained Grant before, apparently the most logical thing is going to the executive, but the day is that the executive needs to be worrying of every single day. So their work is to open the door every morning. And when science can help more, probably is thinking of what will happen the day after tomorrow, what will happen in 4 years from now, in 10 years from now. And that's something that slowly, at least in Spain, but is the legislative power who can help in there. And in addition, there is another power in the legislative decisions, that it's decisions that can be taken together by many different colors in the parliament. And many times, at least here, we are used to a government goes into the power, makes a decision. 4 years later, the government changes, the decision is changed. So trying to move the science advice and to be sure that the decisions that are taken in the parliament are informed by the science is something that we try to move it and trying to put it in here. And in fact, it's not a new thing. As really you have seen today, there are institutions in which we have learned a lot with more than 30 years of experience, but in fact, there are many countries around the world who are members of the European Network of Science Advice for Parliaments, and it was a strange thing that a country like Spain was not in there, and it is not in there yet. So every one of those parliaments has a slightly different science advice, not works everywhere in the same way, and it doesn't make that all parliaments work exactly in the same way. But in any case, I think that putting the science too close to the decision, it's make easier than the decisions are right. Not necessarily because the science has the solutions, it never has all the solutions, but at least if you have the good information, it's probably that you get better chances to do it. And the truth is that, well, we did it. And in 2021, today, this March has started. And I will try to talk today about the making of. So which had been the history that we had been trying to, fighting, probably not as visible as others, trying to make this possible. And the first thing is that it has been a tremendously long fight. So the first time that we found in the Spanish Parliament a reference to create an office for science advice is 1986. So of course, learning from United States, learning from what was happening in Netherlands, in UK, in Spain, they tried to put it in running on, but it didn't happen. Later, a few years later, in 2004, again, there was a quite good opportunity, and again, another proposal that goes into the chamber to make it over and fail. One of the regional parliaments, the Catalonian one, they put their own office moving on. And since 2012, the conferences of science societies has been pushing the parliament to do it, to make it through. But the truth is that for different reasons, it never happens. In fact, in 2018, when we started, I'm a researcher, so I didn't have any experience in science advice, but I was aware of that this existed in other countries. And I had the opportunity to read one interesting work made from Professor Bowl and Professor Moniz in Lisbon, in which analyzed it which was the methods and the mechanisms of science advice, and specifically why in some other countries it was failing, it didn't work. And one of the cases that they studied was Spain. And I recommend to all of you to read it, because it is a really interesting paper in which they identify that in order to have a really effective science advice, we need to put together, of course, politician system and the innovation system, but we need the civil society behind that. We need the three parts working together. And this is something that, at least here in Spain, we make use of that idea to moving on. Because, of course, when you think about, okay, we have to put together science and politicians, let's make them talk. But the truth is that science and politicians probably are the two of the groups with less free time and more specific work. So it's really, really difficult, at least for my experience, to ensure that they will be able to go out of their boxes and start to talk between them. And if you are able to do it, the usual happens is that the president of the vice chair of the university talks with the minister, but that never means that really the scientists that are in the lab are talking with the legislators that are writing the law. So we need to move into something in which there is a network, an ecosystem, in which we ensure that every single scientist with a single idea has the good opportunities to go into the politicians or every decision makers that may need their help. Of course, in the parliament, but also in all the decisions that we are moving it. And for doing that, we started thinking about how to do it. And if you analyze the situation, in Spain, we have, as many other countries, we have the three series, the politicians, the science, and the society. If we analyze slowly each one of them, in Spain, we do not have 23 as in Netherlands, but right now we have 10 different parliamentary groups, which means that there are quite a large amount of ideas in there. And when we analyze it, one of the main reasons why the proposals fail in '86 and in the other years, one of the common things is that those options, or those ideas, were coming or from the government groups or from the groups that were not in the government, but never coming from them together. So it's really difficult to put something like this that requires all the groups agree, that comes from a parliamentary office, from a parliamentary group. It's really difficult because they will, by definition, disagree on the ideas of other parliamentary groups. So we will need something different there. This was the first idea. So in order to set it up, we did not approach parliamentary groups, not of them. No, the ones that were in the government, not the ones that were not in the government. This was one thing. I will explain a little bit how we did it. The other group is the science. And we have much more voices in the science. It's only in Spain there are more than 200 universities and research centers, every one of them with really, really important topics, and which is more important, really, really important problems on politics of the science. So how the money, if they do not have sufficient money, they always are complaining about the rules, the bureaucracy, etc., etc. But we didn't want it to push the politicians with this kind of problems of the science. We wanted to push the politicians with the science. So how the science can help the politicians. And this was difficult to combine our colleagues from the science, that we were not talking about a science policy, but we were talking about how the science can go into the politics. And again, we couldn't come from the big institutions in Spain and trying to push in that direction. So what we did is going the opposite way. So we go into the civil society. In fact, we make use of Twitter. It was the network that put us together and many different people that was interested in this. And in a tweet that started the 1st of January 2018, we generate a proposal that was open for edition for everyone. In a few weeks, we were able to put together ideas from thousands of people for hundreds of institutions that were pushing our parliament, not necessarily to have an office, but at least to start having events, science meets parliament events, like the European Parliament, like the Australian Parliament, or that many other parliaments had. This push from the society forced both all politicians to be together, but also all science institutions to forget their fights, that they also fight a lot, and try to be together with an idea that goes into the politics. And the truth is that we were quite lucky. And one thing that we did is we put in contact with all the parliamentary groups at the same time. And we only interact with all of them together. We were lucky because the parliamentary board, which is format groups of the different groups of the parliament, agree to hear us. And we had the opportunity to explain them what, okay, this is how this works in other parliaments. And at least we would like to make an event here in the Spanish parliament. Why not an event? It's quite cheap, quite simple. Let's do it. And it was hard, but the truth is that they agree. But it was hard to organize and to learn how to do it, because all scientists, we thought that since we are really smart, we know how to communicate what we know. But it is not true at all. And in this, we have to agree to make sense to many people. And one is the post office and also the people in Netherlands. We had the opportunity to bring, for example, Sarah Foxen from the post office to Spain to explain us a little bit how they were working, all the things that Grant has been explaining. And also we had the opportunity to have members of STOA. And we make a selection of topics, a selection of people preparing those topics, following the process of other parliamentary offices were working, all that for free, I have to tell you, but with the support of two institutions. We have the support of the Fundación Cotec, which is a private institution, a private foundation in Spain that is helping and pushing innovation into the country, and also support of Fundación FECIT, which is the public institution that is pushing also the communications between science and society. We did all that. And we organized in November in 2018 2-day meetings in which we did two things. First, we prepare and select 12 topics, trying to follow the methods of POST, I have to tell you. And those topics were selected from a open call in which every citizen could propose a topic, and we made a filter which one of them had really evidence. And from that short list, we present them to the parliamentary groups, and they unanimity select which were the 12 topics that we were going to have to discuss. And then we have two types of events. We had one event, in a public event, 200 scientists, more than 100 MPs discussing about these topics. So that's the age, artificial intelligence, climate change, these quite general topics, I have to tell you, but in a public manner. So trying to demonstrate that the debate between science and politics, it's possible, and it's made useful for the society. And also we have other types of events in which we have more specific topics, in which we were discussing about antibiotics, about Switzerland, about many different smaller topics, but in a closed room, in which the politicians from the different groups were able to ask questions to the experts in the field without feeling the pressure to be being recorded or being in a public scenario. The truth that it was, I have to tell you, hard to organize, but really successful from the point of view that already in December 2018, the whole parliament decided to set up the parliamentary office. So everything was ready. We were really happy. But as you know, at least in Spain during 2019, we have two general elections, or government change, everything changed, or parliamentary boards, or contacts MPs changed, everything changed. But again, since we were talking with all groups, once the new government was set up, once the new parliament was set up twice, so we have already 3 parliaments that we have been discussing with, we were able to interact again with all of them. And we were able always to explain to all of them that we are not working from one group or for another group, but we are coming from the civil society. And again, we get the agreement of all of them to set it up in 2020. Then in 2020, we are starting to suffer a COVID pandemic. So it's delays again everything. But the truth is that in this time, and we have been working with different parliamentary offices around the world, we have made a detailed analysis of how the 23 parliamentary offices that are working in EPTA interact. And we have been, we prepare a report that we distribute, and we have been the opportunity to explain it to the parliamentary board. And that was in October the last year. And in this parliamentary report, what we explained is that, of course, we need the office and we need this kind of formal institution where we prepare topics, where we can explain which are the specific things that the parliamentary may need, but also we need all the informal ways. So we need meetings, we need closing gaps, we need the interconnections between science and politics, because of course we need that the politicians are aware of what science is doing, but at least in Spain we also had the problems that many scientists are not really aware of which are the politics problems or how to communicate their knowledge to the politics. And these kind of informal aspects are probably, even at least in the stage in we are, even more useful than the formal advice. But anything, we again were able to combine all of them. And last October, we were able to present it. And the first week of March, we were able to hear that finally the parliamentary office will be set up. This parliamentary office will be inside the parliament, but supported by an external institution, which is the Fundación Española para la Ciencia y la Tecnología, which is an institution who has a lot of experience in communicating science with the society and will be in charge of this difficult task. And also will take into account the complements of many different science institutions. We are right now, and we are trying to help defining all the protocols for selecting the topics, for following which will be the expert that we interact. And I have to tell you the truth, we are trying to learn from the experience of many different offices around the world and trying to adapt them to our situation and trying to make this as useful as possible. So we like this slide, which is we were able to put a lot of scientists inside the parliament together with politicians and trying to ensure that the science has a door there, and it can be a place where try to inform the politicians who may help us to ensure that this country and hopefully all Europe and all the countries around the world make use of the knowledge to identify which will be the risk and the main opportunities. So for us, this is just the beginning, and it already takes 3 years, but now is when we have the day one, and we are only getting to make it better because we are convinced that science and life cannot be and should not be separated, and we will do all our work to make sure that the science make as useful as possible for the society, and of course our influencers, who are the politicians, who decide our future, and we want to be sure that our future is as bright as possible. So thank you, and open to any question.
Wonderful. Congratulations on this success. Wonderful, Andreu. I have only a very brief question, and then we will leave the other questions for the plenary. It is extremely exciting to learn how you got this whole process on a new footing started and then successful by going to civil society and starting this tweet kind of surge and asking people to react. My question is, does this now create some obligation for you to go back to these citizens and to report about what you have done, or are you basically reasoning, well, everyone can see what is happening in Parliament because those are the people's representatives and that's it? Or do you have some sort of plan to get back to the people one way or the other?
Really, really good question and really difficult one. One of the things that one of the things that we have achieved, or Spain has achieved, is that setting up an office that tries to be closer to what post office is or to Rathenow Institute is. But the truth is that this was possible only because a lot of people was pushing from the civil society. So we are, and that's one of our goals now in the Association of Science in Parliament, is that we need to be sure that this goes into every single citizen and also going into other scenarios. So we are starting working with regional parliaments, we are starting working with the city halls, and we are trying to empower scientists, but also all the different people which are around it, the institutions and the people, to make sure that they have the possibility to propose topics, they have the possibility to propose problems, and to try to focus on top of the table of decision makers those issues which are the issues that the citizens require solutions, and the science may help to inform that solutions. Because at least here, I think it happens everywhere, but politicians seems to be talking more time about themselves than about the problems of the citizens. And this is another excuse to put on top of the table topics that probably are not the topics that politicians are day by day discussing between them.
Thank you, Andreu. Thank you. But we will probably return to this at the end of our meeting in the plenary discussion. So thank you for your presentation. And I would now like to turn to introducing our last speaker, Carla Souza. Most importantly, she is Vice President of the Commission for Education, Science, Youth and Sports in the Portuguese Parliament. Her background is in communication sciences, and she also has a degree from Contemporary Academy of Spectacle. Professionally, apart from being a member of Parliament, she is an actress and a cultural producer. But we are particularly happy to have her here because as Vice President of this Parliamentary Commission for Education, Science, Youth and Sports, particularly the Education and Science, she is the Member of Parliament who, with her colleagues, can take these messages further, and we are extremely keen to hear about your views and experiences and perhaps even plans for the future. Carla Souza, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I begin by greeting Ambassador Crescenti, who invited the Committee of Education, Science, Youth and Sport of the Portuguese Parliament to be represented here in these important sessions. My greetings to Doutora Mara Almeida, do Centro de Filosofia das Ciências da Universidade de Lisboa, for co-organizing these workshops. A greeting to the other members of the panel who made such important and clear presentations, and of course to the audience in this session. Thank you again for inviting us. So we're in a very preliminary situation of all the debates we had here already. So I would like to start with the title of the workshop, Scientific Council in Parliament. Why is it relevant? Because I think it's important to start with questions, and that's why I understand how pertinent and appropriate the motto that calls us to this debate. Because in times of uncertainty, economic, social and environmental crisis, the importance of the questions has not been exhausted. The search for understanding and solving problems has not ended. So my academic and professional experience, which began in journalism, took shelter in the arts, leads me to comfortably address the world of questions. And as a politician, a position I hold today, I face every day with the need to build bridges between the questions I am used to ask and finding the political answers that are necessary to defend the common good. So in a way, I'll try to do the same today. As Vice Chairman of the Committee on Education, Science, Youth and Sport, it is up to me to offer a broad and comprehensive vision where various points of views can be found. And I'll try to do that using a quote from Beckett that is a motto for artists, but maybe also for scientists. Try again, fail better. So I'll try then. And the first thing that came into my mind was, if we're discussing the way to create bridges between science and politics, why don't they exist still? What separates science and politics? And at the first glance, perhaps naive, a lot. Uncertainty and doubt preside over the model of scientific research. Politics needs and lives well with certainties. Science values the methodology of the process. The policy requires the valorization of results. Science needs time for experimentation. Politics need rapid execution. So where one offers values, the other offers facts. Science will be the art that produces knowledge about the world through rigorous formal criteria in a controlled empirical observation. Political action cannot live with this demand under penalty that the danger of inaction or late decision renders decisions ineffective. Trust and knowledge take decades to build and are very fragile, and political power doesn't always have the luxury of time that we already spoke here about to decide based on all available information. Finally, a last difference from these two worlds, the way as they understand error. Scientific research is susceptible to error throughout the process, from the questions that are asked and that give rise to problems, to the process that leads us to knowledge. Everything is growing in a world of trial error. You live with that. As in the arts, error is part of the learning process. But in politics, the error is difficult to comprehend, to acknowledge, and most of the times is seen as a mistake on the process, difficult to assume and accept, because when that happens, the consequences can be brutal for society. Carl Sagan said in 1987, in science, it often happens to scientists to say, you know, that's a good argument, my position is wrong, and they change their minds. But it doesn't happen as often as it should, because scientists are human and the changes are painful, but it happens every day. I can't remember the last time this happened in politics or religion. So I ask, what can bring science closer to politics or vice versa? Well, a pandemic, for instance. Carl Sagan did not live in the pandemic period, or he would have the opportunity to see politicians humbly changing their minds depending on the scientific information received. Angela Merkel assumed that mistake yesterday. And while this has ever seen as a weakness by some sectors of society, these changes resulted from the strength of scientific knowledge that has been transmitting more and better information to political decision on a daily basis. They come closer together by the knowledge they both need to make decisions. Both science and politics require knowledge to perform their duties in order to work towards an idea of humanity's progress. Of course, we're talking about democracies, political systems where scientists work for the best of everyone, and politicians do not use science and technology as instruments of totalitarianism. Both know that science deals with objective truths that help clarify conflicts of interest and values. Both know that science knowledge is capable of pointing out paths free of controversy, paths of evidence that can support political power to make the decisions and public policies that fit it. That this proximity dialogue is a point of confluence that is useful to both and to society at large. They are closer to the fact that science will be all the more recognized, its authority all the more strengthened, the more its possibility of shaping public policies, and the policy will all be the more enlightened and lucid, the more it is based on scientific knowledge. Of course, this approach is a sort of a game of balance. Both know that each other's rapprochement must be balanced under penalty that scientists over proximity to politics is a threat to their legitimacy, and politicians become expendable when they take political decisions solely based on the technical advance of science. Does the political decision require scientific advice? Well, in the research I did for this speech, I came across a draft resolution of 2009, adopted unanimously in the Portuguese Parliament, in which it reads, considering the strategic importance of the areas of science, technology, and innovation in the human, cultural, social, and economic development of the country, the Assembly of the Republic begins the organization of discussion sessions in conjunction with the Science Alive Agency, dubbed Cafés de Ciência. Assuming the need to value parliamentary work and its articulation with the scientific community, it is recognized that Parliament is increasingly being questioned by sensitive and controversial public debates in the sectors of the environment, energy, medicine, communication, among others. And that considering the special and decisive importance of many of these matters for the direction and future of society, the Assembly of the Republic must admit as imperative the qualification of its intervention in the monitoring of the agenda and evolution of all these realities. And in that sense, the Assembly resolves to provide an institutional platform that promotes the meeting of politicians and scientists in order to provide, in a timely and instrumental manner, qualified and usable information of all the controversies and scientific implications that determine or are a consequence of public policies. The fact is, I have not exact an answer to the fact that after 12 years, Parliament has not advanced with the approved project. But parliamentary instability will certainly have a say in this outcome. Each election changes the composition of the committees. Members renew themselves and the process restarts. So probably the political eye took other emergencies, like the financial crisis that follow, will not be unrelated to all this, and political priorities have become different. But Parliament never left science advice. Every political issue that needs a scientific approach, be it climate change or euthanasia, the scientists are called to the Parliament to help us clarify meanings, debate the ethics of the innovation or technology to improve the public legislation. And from my parliamentary experience, I can tell you that Cafés de Ciência, or coffees of science, that were renewed in the previous legislature and are maintained annually under the organization of the Education Committee with the coordination of the scientist and socialist deputy Alexandre Quintanilha, enables the dialogue between politicians and scientists by extending scientific knowledge of current issues that are not exactly on parliamentary debate, but are matters of concern, such as urban stability, data policy, or biotechnology. Debates that we want to continue to promote, but which unfortunately have been suspended with the pandemic. And since then, we have been constantly living with the need for the presence of science, scientific advice, and dependence of scientific experimentation. We learn a new scientific lexicon, we rely on technology to fight the virus, and we rely on science to ensure that we will all have a future with hope. It's too much of a short time of a year. In doubt, in distress, in restlessness, it was to science, which we hold on to in search of a future. As the physicist Carlos Fiolhais says, science is not everything, but without science, we do not save ourselves. As an emergency and public health situation in global terms, never has it been so important today to have a scientific support for political decisions to be taken on the basis of a strengthened information system. And in a world so full of information, it's easy for politicians to drown on it. Hence the importance of gaining robust knowledge, improving levels of scientific literacy, scientific advice, and ensuring effective communication between multidisciplinary and political expert teams. And it was in order to make room for politicians and scientists and social partners to be involved, to obtain clarifications and various perspectives on the virus and the pandemic, that the Portuguese government took over the so-called Infarmed meetings, where the evolution of the pandemic in the country was analyzed weekly by epidemiologists and public health doctors, first in closed doors, then open online to journalists and public, where all the parliamentary leaders and the rest of the members of the parliament could watch. And if initially the political consensus seemed to be guaranteed around the scientific knowledge presented, it took a few months for political differences to stand out. In June last year, there were already politicians saying the Infarmed meetings were of little help. As time changed, the scientific consensus and the findings were almost daily, The models were correcting or being annulled. The political consensus was diluting or nullifying. And in these situations, it's not easy to decide which public health measures are appropriate for such troubled times, or which guidelines and measures are clear to citizens. Faced with the political fragmentation of the consensus previously established, and in the face of scientific consensus that at one point it seemed to be a we don't know, the government decided to act, taking its own responsibility in the decisions. Because, as the scientist Philip Freud says, pandemic means deciding and leading in uncertainty. So, how to improve and maintain this relationship? Parliament brings together, and it's in charge of representing the whole collective will of society. And every elected member has the weight of that responsibility. As such, it's not always a place of harmony. It is conflicting, divergent, where dialectics is privileged as a method to create bridges of dialogue and commitments so that constructive legislative measures for society can be created. Science, technology, and innovation are increasingly present on European and national political agendas, either as key elements in economic growth or because scientific and technological developments are challenging existing public policies and legislation due to their impact on society. Technological evaluation must contain social elements and ethical principles, must respect constitutional and legal rights, must contribute to constructive solutions. The debate on biomedicine, for example, has to make us question the impact it will have on national security, but also the problem it poses on data protection. It becomes increasingly difficult for parliamentarians in democratic states to understand all the impacts of existing scientific and technological advances and to take full comprehension for the legislation needed for the regulation of these new scientific and technological needs. Many of these challenges are global, which enables and promotes the sharing of global information on the theme and requires openness and network dialogue from us. So information that must be promoted. We also need to ensure an inter and multidisciplinary approach to the issues. If the natural science helps us find a vaccine, it will be the social science that will play an essential role in ensuring the successful implementation of outlook policies and the recovery of societies, helping us to recognize the behavior of human beings and to ensure that the measures we take are suitable for the whole population, trying to not to leave no one behind. So we must keep listening to scientists to ensure that the information we receive is robust and continue to promote the channels available to knowledge. Recently, the government appointed the members of the National Council of Science, Technology and Innovation, the government's advisory body that has been revived and will collaborate whenever requested by the Assembly of the Republic in parliamentary debates on science, technology and innovation, contributing to the development, strengthening and support of the national scientific and technological system. So we can and must make them more involved in parliamentary analysis and decision-making process. So more than ever, science needs to be close to politics because the weaknesses we face in the world are complex, are globalized problems that require interconnectivity and can only be tackled with robust knowledge. And when it's not robust, mistrust tends to take over the public space. And with them comes the lie, the conspiracies, the concealment, and it's up to scientists to strengthen scientific information and to politicians to ensure that this scientific information strengthens democracy. It is up to politicians to recognize the contribution of scientific knowledge, to make use of it in public policies, assuming that the answers we have are sometimes uncertain and complex. That I think is the way to build trust and legitimacy between each other and in society. Thank you. I'm very sorry if my English was not so good. Thank you. Hoping to questions.
Thank you, Carla. You were crystal clear. Thank you so much. One very brief question to you before we start the plenary discussion. You finished by mentioning that this council is sort of come to life again by the government. Do you feel, as a member of parliament, that that Council for Science and Technology can just as well serve you as parliamentarians as it serves the government, or are you still feeling that you need a kind of an independent kind of support? I mean, your sketch was very convincing of how difficult the relation between science and politics is, and I can imagine that that creates a specific wish on the side of the parliamentarians, the members of parliament, than only from the government. So how do you feel about council?
Yes, well, we still haven't worked with them. We need to really, it was very recent that this was renewed. And of course, it was renewed because of the pandemic, of the importance of the knowledge that we needed to have and the government needed to have to make more robust decisions. And so they are able to attend also the meetings if asked, when the parliament asks. So we will have to do that to understand that if they have their autonomy, the independence they need to make responses to us, to give us the responses that we need, which are scientific. It's not political. It doesn't have to be ideological. So it's a new process because, in a way, as it was in Spain when I saw the presentation of Andrew, it's not that we don't care about science, it's that there is still, we're very separate in the society, the way society sees science, the way it approaches the knowledge. And so we have problems still between that. And I think that politicians in parliament can always, and we try always to do, to have the scientific side of the equation always present with us. But we don't have a structure. We have on the process of legislation, every situation we can call scientists to work with us. So this is new. We're trying to understand exactly what can we achieve with this, because it's what I told you. We don't know exactly. I wasn't here. We don't know exactly why the process in 209 stopped. We don't know why that stopped. I don't know exactly why people, even older deputies that were here, didn't follow the process. So it seems a little like we have to, sometimes we're always restarting. That's a feeling I still have now.
Thank you very much. And I think it is important for all of us, also everyone in the audience, to realize that this development of the scientific advice to governments and parliaments everywhere in the world is one constant experiment. There is the constant need to rethink, if not reinvent, ways that we do that. So in that sense, taking that counsel and experimenting with it seems a very wise plan. I'm now inviting everyone to put questions in the chat. In the meantime, I have one very quick question to Andreu, and then I'll look at the questions that are already there. The quick question to you, Andreu, is the same that I asked to Grant and Melanie. It's about the size of the unit that is now being created. The basic question is, will that unit in Parliament in Madrid have its own staff?
Yes, sure. And this is one of the things that we have been pushing a lot. We are fully convinced that we need people who specifically spend their time reading, talking with scientists and preparing that for politicians, but at the same time reading, talking with from politicians and preparing their problems to scientists. So this office in Spain will start with a budget of around 400,000 euros, and the plan is to have between 5-6 persons working on, and hopefully it will grow slowly but directly. And our plan is to have, as soon as possible, a size in which we could be closer to what Post is doing. I don't think we will be able to go as big as the Netherlands, but at least having between 5 and 10 people working is our goal for next years. And in fact, if you know someone from your countries with experience that wants to come to work to Spain in this office, they will be more than open to her from proposals.
We will pass on the message. Thank you, Andreu. I would now like to pick up a few questions that were already raised and in a way very nicely prepared by Carla's presentation, where she elaborated on the very different styles of doing politics and doing science and on trust questions. And I'm basically asking this to all of you, but the concrete way in which it was asked by one of our participants was a question to Melanie. The Rathenau Institute is not inside Parliament; it is outside. It is more or less independent, and the question was: does that imply that people in the Netherlands generally see the Rathenau Institute as just another lobby organization? And I'm reading a little bit of a negative note in that question. I'm not sure. So after a quick reaction of Melanie, I'm curious to hear from Grant how the public image of Post is, and whether he feels that being in Parliament actually takes care of this risk that the one who asked the question is implying. Melanie first.
Yes, I think it's a very good question. It is our constant concern. And that's why I explained also that we put policy options, that we don't want to seem a one issue movement, not advocating one solution to, like was explained to all of us, also Carla, very complex issues. We want to show it's a diversity of policy options and values that are at stake, and we really make it clear it's up to people in Parliament to weigh these options and also weigh the evidence and weigh the values. And this is in our tone of voice and in everything we produce. We are very careful about this, but it's a very good question, because the risk is of course there, that it seems like, okay, you are just a science advocate, or you are Amnesty International, or you are, and we have to make sure, and this is what we, what all of us are very sensitive towards. And also when we have new people coming in, we really train each other. It's not our opinion, it's really, we need to follow our gut feelings about wrong or right, but then we need to go and find out, maybe I think there is something the matter, but what is it? What can we find? Who can we hear? And show that we talk to different stakeholders, that we and lay it out in the way we present it to the Parliament. But the question is, it's our biggest risk that we run. It's a very good question.
Thank you, Melanie. Grant, would you think that you are institutionally in a more comfortable position, or do you face the same problems?
In some ways, I think we are more comfortable, but there's some ways just to look at that. One is scientists are one of the most trusted professions in the UK. So there's a national survey that's done, and top is always doctors, and then it's nurses. Scientists are relatively high up there. Politicians tend to be bottom. Sorry, Carla. And the only proviso on that is government scientists are a bit lower down than general scientists. And that's simply because a lot of the public don't understand how the government science side of things work. They don't realise that they are given completely independent advice, and they feel that they're more like civil servants, so they're provided advice to fit policy, for example. On Parliament side for us, we are quite lucky in that we are very bound, effectively by an oath of impartiality. So we look very impartially at the evidence, and we present it simply as the evidence without put in any kind of values or anything else, and that's the same for all parliamentary servants. And that means that this is one of the reasons we have quite a wide number of stakeholders that feed into each Postnote to make sure that we capture those different values. But it also protects us from some of the criticism that scientists outside of Parliament get, which is, if you are a scientist that is really interested in genomics, you will have a bias towards the use of genomics for different things. Same way, if you're a scientist that studies AI, you will have that inherent bias that as much as you avoid it, you will be colouring the evidence that you give with that bias. So the other risk is sometimes scientists, as Melanie alluded to earlier, get confused about science for policy versus policy for science. So I'm very interested in science for policy, but if you talk to national academies, for example, they'll often do policy for science. They'll try and push for more science funding, and that gets politicians' backs up as well. So I think we are in a good place for those reasons, because we are completely impartial. We have no research interest that we want to push in any way, and we don't have to worry about funding in that kind of way either.
Thank you, Grant. That's clear. And it's a nice contrast between the Dutch and the British experience. I have one question that again is a general question, but I would like to start with Andreu. It's a question that Felipe asked, and he asked it in reaction to Grant's presentation. And the question is: does the robust review process shield enough the science from the post-produced scientific advice? Does it shield that from party politicians and from the infighting of partisan politics? And I would like to turn this in a question to Andreu. Have you already thought of peer review mechanisms for the office that you are creating at this moment?
Sure. In fact, this is one of the main, I will not say complaints, but one of the main questions that were coming from parliamentaries or MPs, but also from the people who is working in there, the lawyers, is that how to ensure that the information that goes into those reports or into those meetings is sufficiently reviewed, the quality of that. And in that we have tried to learn a lot, as I was telling before, and Grant was explaining. You cannot expect from an expert in a field to be impartial. By definition, if I'm doing research in my topic, is because I think that this topic is really, really important. And other experts in similar topic may think that my hypotheses are not right. So we need to put together many different stakeholders to put into having the options. And then once we have that, we need to have external reviewers to go into the text or go into the materials and have that prepared before moving it into something that comes from our office. And also, it's important to remark that at least we will try to work in that way, try to avoid recommendations. I think that science is not here for making any kind of recommendation. Science, in the best way, is to say, okay, this is the data that we have today. This is the information that we have today. These are the options that other people are suggesting or other parliaments are doing. But the decisions is matter of politicians. Why we select and we pay them is to make the difficult part, to make a decision.
Thank you. Pretty clear. I would like, Carla, you stressed this very point that science is partly about uncertainty, while the politicians want certainty, and you had a very nice list of contrasts that characterize the style of politics versus the style of science. I am curious, and I know, you haven't done research, but I would really like to hear your intuitions as a member of Parliament about the trust in science amongst the Portuguese population. Grant just cited research in Britain, and I know the results of similar research in the Netherlands are exactly the same, that scientists still are relatively well trusted in this world where everyone is mistrusted. What is your intuition about the situation in Portugal? Because that is quite important to when thinking about how to shape scientific advice and the need of scientific advice for Parliament.
Well, it was very, as Andrew was saying, it was very important in this pandemic phase. The perception of the society, of the Portuguese society, of the importance of science, it was very high. I mean, science was bringing us, as I was saying, the hope. It was everything we had. We have nothing. We were closed doors, and every day there were scientists and ministers of health, doctors, and science telling us exactly what we were doing, why we were doing with the in those conditions, and we had to protect ourselves. And people just follow that. It was really, really important. But on the first phase, politicians and scientific scientists were on the same side. We were all on the same side. And so it was very easy for both to be on top. It was really, I mean, we felt that people were very confident on the decisions we were making. What changed was with the following of the meetings, as Andrew was saying, you don't have to make recommendations, which is a part of the process here. At a determined moment, politicians were asking for recommendations. Politicians were like, yeah, but now, next, what can we do? What will we do? And it was then that the politicians started saying, this is dull. I mean, we're not getting any more information of these meetings. So it was like 6 months of meetings, and started really getting frustrated. Politicians started getting frustrated about this. And I think what Andrew said was right. I mean, so what the government started to do was saying, okay, we have to make responsibility for now for the decisions. We heard everybody, we talked to everybody, we listened, we make questions, but now it's our time to decide. And so when they started deciding, every political party started making decisions, obviously, on their own ideologies. So then was a sort of a chaos, because everyone was saying, yeah, the problem we have is the same, but now everyone can have their own solution. It was a difficult moment, but really, the scientists and the science in Portugal and the importance we gave to scientists in Portugal, we started knowing their names. They were going on TV all the time. It's true that some of them, when they started talking a lot on the media, there were confusions even between them, and it didn't help in a certain moment, you know, when they started saying different things about the same afternoon where they spent seeing the same documents. So I mean, I think that the society built trust on science and on the scientists. We're still hearing them today. I mean, it never was so many programs on TV and on radio about science and the future that we will have. It's an important moment. We can, we can take that for what we can do afterwards. But it's I mean, the various confinements, very open and closed things of the country that we're still living in. We're still on confinement. In a certain moment, it's like that you can take, after all this time, you can take the scientists and they take care of your health, but it's like the other scientists of social science weren't having a voice, and so society needed to hear from, psychologists and everything, because they needed them at a certain point. So I think that we have to open up all this debate and all the fronts, and it can't happen only on TV because it can be messy. So I mean, we really have to open up on Parliament and on government, of course. Government is already doing that, but we have to do it on Parliament also, because we know the problems. We know that they have to mingle all together. We have to discuss everything, but we're still on that process. We're starting to realize that.
Thank you, Carla. I think that you describe a process that is visible in very many countries, maybe to finish, because I have now to call an end to this workshop. Maybe to finish on a positive note is that once the dust has settled and societies have opened up again, we may do explicitly what you just did and draw lessons from what happened in the past year, quite explicitly referring back to that period when we were all rallying behind the scientific advice, but then also realizing that virologists can only do that much, and that we do need the social sciences and the humanities in addition. So at some point, looking back, drawing lessons, and then trying to build further in each of our science advice systems to politics. And it only underlines how pertinent and how timely this series of workshops was that we were part of. Let me, before thanking the organizers, thank our 4 speakers, specifically for today's contributions and the discussion. I thank the audience for being here, and I apologize for not being able to relay all the questions that you had, but I tried to combine a few. And then finally, a warm thank you to the UK Embassy in Portugal and the Department of Philosophy of Science with Mara Almeida. And with that said, I close this workshop and I wish you all a very good day. Thank you.